Discuss it all. Jonathan Swan is a national political reporter from The Hill, joins me now from Washington. And Jonathan, I want to begin with today's news. Donald Trump has said that he has no plans to pursue an investigation of Hillary Clinton. What's your reaction here?
This is the latest in what is a choreographed display of chivalry and warm-heartedness from the president-elect. It's very clear that there is a strategy in place and talking points in place by which the president and his team, president-elect and his team, want to play up the fact that he's reaching out to his enemies. So you notice Mike Pence did something quite unusual on the Sunday shows. He actually said explicitly that Mitt Romney, who was at war with Donald Trump throughout the campaign, is under active consideration for Secretary of State. His team played up Donald Trump's meeting with Ted Cruz, same with South Carolina's Nikki Haley. Now, what I think we need to do as journalists is separate pageantry from reality. And if we look at Donald Trump's appointments so far, none of them have been of this, enemy bringing into the fold ilk.
Well, as it regards Secretary of State Rudy Giuliani, a staunch Trump loyalist, has had his name attached to that job from the beginning, but it remains just that, attached but not given. What do you make of that as it regards certainly what we saw from the president-elect meeting with Romney this past weekend?
So it is very hard to report on this because the Trump team is trying to make it known to reporters that they are considering Mitt Romney. What's very difficult to tell is whether this is spin and a head fake or whether it's actually real. I'd still be stunned if they appointed Mitt Romney Secretary of State. Rudy Giuliani has his own problems with lots of business entanglements overseas, and that has not escaped the notice of the Trump team. There's others in consideration. Another name that has been floated is John Bolton, the very hawkish former ambassador to the United Nations.
I want to return actually to Kellyanne Conway. It was something she said this morning. Very specifically, I'm going to quote it. He, Donald Trump, is thinking of many different things as he prepares to become the president, and things that sound like the campaign are not among them. End quote. What do you make of that statement?
Again, it's part of this pattern. It needs to be seen as a pattern. There's nothing subtle about this. It's ostentatious, charitable signals of reaching out, the benevolent leader and all of these things. I mean, it's all of a piece. And what they're trying to project at the moment is that Donald Trump is somber and humble and is accepting the weight of this office and is reaching out to all Americans. They know they've got huge problems with a number of Americans. Well, really, Hillary Clinton's won the popular vote by a record margin for a losing candidate. So they know there's a lot of Americans who are not happy with the result. So they're trying to change perceptions.
As we then mentioned, and against the idea then of a pattern we're seeing playing out, what do you make of the meeting with Representative Tulsi Gabbard, and specifically with what Steve Bannon, and I know you tweeted about this, what Steve Bannon is said to prefer for the White House to come?
This is a really interesting detail that I have to say a lot of media missed this. There was some surprise that Donald Trump was meeting at Trump Tower yesterday. A week earlier, I reported a piece saying that Steve Bannon, Donald Trump's chief strategist, was really, really big on Tulsi Gabbard, big fan. And this was a Bannon reach out. Bannon really respects her for naming what he describes as the enemy, radical Islam. She's been quite vocal in attacking the Obama administration. And if you look at Breitbart News, the right-wing website he chaired, if you look at their coverage of her, it's been highlighting all of these things that she's done as a rebel from her party. Steve Bannon's also a big fan of Bernie Sanders, by the way. Steve Bannon wants to break down the two-party system. He wants to crush elites, and so he supports populism wherever it pops up. So it's convenient for his political purposes to have someone from the left supporting ideas that he favours.
Steve Bannon has been noted in saying that perhaps his idea of diversity is not the conventional idea of diversity. Obviously, Representative Gabbard would lend some to a series of picks that we have seen so far to not just represent the extreme views of the Trump campaign during said campaign, but also certainly a homogenous cabinet thus far.
It's hard to know how much they care about this. They're certainly talking about it a little bit, but I feel like this is because it's being forced upon them by the media. There's a few stories popping up. I think I was on the conference call with the Trump officials yesterday, and one of the reporters asked about it. They know it's something that's going to keep coming up. So Tulsi Gabbard's are very convenient if they just select her for some role, because she's a Democrat as well as being a woman and not being a white male. So she fills a number of roles, and I think it's also notable that they've been highlighting and emphasising the fact that Donald Trump has reached out to Nikki Haley, because she's another example that they're not just looking at elderly white men.
Jonathan, we've certainly seen the president-elect have something of a tumultuous go with the press in the last 24 hours. He canceled the meeting with the New York Times. He put the meeting back on his schedule. He sat down with members of the press yesterday, and it was equated to something of a firing squad, the meeting was. And now we see these 6 different points of emphasis for his 100 days spoken of in a YouTube video that he's released. It has been 13 days since he was elected president. He has not had an open, on-the-record moment with assembled media to this degree. How concerned are you about access to the president and his administration moving forward?
I'm a little bit skeptical when I see all the hand-wringing about access and about polished YouTube videos, because the current administration has been bypassing the media for 8 years in various ways, bypassing serious interviews, turning the White House communications shop into effectively a media company. Of course, we want access to the president. I just think it's up to reporters to be innovative, to be aggressive, not to accept the terms that the president sets.
You earlier mentioned perhaps issues with Rudy Giuliani's personal business dealings. It was another point of emphasis for Mr. Trump yesterday, speaking of the crooked media and wondering if it would continue to look into his global business dealings. I know you tweeted this. The president-elect signals that he intends to brazen it out in office with his business interests. What did you mean?
What I mean is that Donald Trump had a theory of the case in the general election, which is that the norms that usually apply to candidates do not apply to him. His tax returns are the perfect example of that. I think he was the first candidate in 40 years not to release his tax returns, and him and his staff just shrugged their shoulders and said, "We don't think anyone cares." And guess what? He was vindicated by the election result. So he's taking a similar approach, it seems. And I would stress it seems, because we don't yet know exactly what he's going to do. But that seemed to me to be quite unapologetic. And on this morning's conference call with Trump campaign officials, I'd say about 60% of the questions from reporters were on that issue of conflicts of interest. So they're juggling, do we want this to be a story for the next 4 years, or do we want to open ourselves up to unwanted scrutiny? We don't know what international links Donald Trump has. We don't know what business he has overseas. And opening up his tax returns, as his son has acknowledged, would be politically very dangerous.
He has said at times that he would put his businesses into a blind trust. He then said, actually, if a blind trust means that my children run it, then I guess I'll do that. Could you...
That's not a blind trust.
At all. It is by no definition of it. And so I suppose, based on what you just said, it bears theorizing. Could you see a scenario in which Donald Trump does not relinquish control of his businesses at all and runs them simultaneously while serving as president?
Sure. It's crazy to think that Donald Trump will abide by norms of political candidates in recent history. He hasn't done it so far, so it would actually be more unusual if Donald Trump did say, you know what, I'm going to release my tax returns and liquidate everything and put it in a blind trust. I mean, we saw Ivanka in a meeting with Japan's Prime Minister. There's been reports, some of them contested, that he's discussed business with other foreign officials. So, sure, I mean, Donald Trump has assured people that he doesn't care about his businesses, but we all know how much it means to him and how much his brand means to him. So it's something that as reporters we need to stay vigilant upon.
Hear, hear. Jonathan Swan of The Hill, cannot thank you enough for the time and the insight. I hope you'll return.
Pleasure.